In case some of you guys don't know, we do have a presidential election coming up tomorrow, and also we have elections to determine which political party will control the United States Senate. Will it still be the Republican Party, or will the Democratic Party gain control of the United States Senate? I mean, both of these are very important questions, and it's going to be very exciting to watch. And I've been following the United States election very, very closely. In fact, watching the U.S. elections has been tradition for me ever since I was a kid. I remember even back in 1988, when I'd get home from elementary school. I'd go home to my parents and we'd all watch the elections together. And I even remember the election between Michael Dukakis and George H.W. Bush. I mean, I'm that old. I'm 39 years old. But anyways, I wanted to go over this because I think it would be fun to see like how good of a political analyst I am. Because, you know, I can make these predictions, and if I'm right, people can say, oh, wow, you were so close, or you were exactly on point, or you were very close to being on point, or people can come on tomorrow and say that, like, oh, you were totally off, you should never do this ever again. And, you know, this is not something I'm going to make a habit of. I mean, this channel is mostly about subjects which interest me, and politics do interest me, but it's very seldom that I want to talk about it very frequently, just because it's a very divisive issue. So I'm going to put my political partisanship aside for a moment. I mean, I do have my political biases. I mean, I'll admit I did vote for Biden, but I'm going to still try to look at this election as objectively as possible, and I'm going to make these predictions based on what I think will happen, not what I want to happen. So with that said, let's go ahead and start with the map on the left first for the U.S. presidential election, and we're going to go ahead and fill in the safe Democratic states or blue states. You got California there, very big prize for the Democratic Party, worth 55 electoral votes. And let's see, we got Virginia. Virginia is interesting as in it's the only southern state that is Democratic. It didn't always used to be. It used to be like a pretty solidly Republican state until Barack Obama won it in 2008. And I think that's because of the, I don't know, maybe the migration of people from New England who moved down there for whatever reason. I know Northern Virginia is more Democratic than Southern Virginia, but it's definitely not going to go red this year, maybe not ever again. And when I say southern states, I'm talking about states that were part of the former Confederacy, even though geographically it doesn't look that overwhelmingly southern. I mean, that would be something more like Alabama, Georgia, or Florida. Okay, we got New York, of course, and, you know, upstate New York is kind of conservative, but New York City, where the huge bulk of the population is, it's the largest U.S. city in the country, is overwhelmingly Democratic. And that's how it works with cities, that cities are typically more Democratic and more rural areas are more Republican. And so one big exception to that would be Vermont. Vermont's a pretty rural state, has the second smallest population in the country, but it's still Democratic. And let's also talk about not New Hampshire, Massachusetts. New Hampshire is interesting because it's in a very blue part of the country, but it's the most conservative of the New England states. So that's going to be, I'm not going to call that a safe Democratic state. But in the case of Maine, let's see. Pardon me. I swear I don't have the commie cough. But anyways, in the case of Maine, Maine is interesting in the sense that it actually divides its, it awards its electoral votes based on district. So at large, Joe Biden is almost certain to win Maine, but the second congressional district is going to be considered competitive. So I'm going to leave that as blank for now. Okay, New Jersey. Democratic. New Jersey is definitely the armpit of the country. It's a small state, but it has a very high population, so it's a very packed state. We also have Connecticut, Rhode Island, the smallest geographic state in the country, very Democratic because of Providence. You have Delaware. It's Joe Biden's home state. No chance he's going to lose that. Maryland is very Democratic, and also D.C., the District of Columbia. That's not a state, but it still has a population which is larger than both Vermont and Wyoming, so it still gets 3 electoral votes. So let's see what else we have for blue states. Oh, yeah, New Mexico is a blue state. And, you know, that used to be a competitive state. Like, I know George W. Bush won it in 2004, but ever since Barack Obama won it overwhelmingly in 2008, it hasn't really been focused on by the Republican Party too much. I know Trump campaigned there once in 2016, but I don't think he is really focusing on trying to win that state this year. Hawaii is very blue. I think it is maybe the most lopsidedly blue state in the country, either that or Vermont or Massachusetts, one of those, but there's no chance it's going red this year. So let's see, did I miss any of the blue states? Oh, yeah, Illinois. There we go. Illinois would be a conservative state, much like some of the surrounding states it's around, if it weren't for the fact that Chicago is there, and Chicago is, I think, the 3rd largest city in the country, and because of that, it's a safe blue state. It's definitely the bluest of all the Midwestern states. So, anyways, I think that covers it as far as blue states go. So right off the bat, Joe Biden is going to have 203 electoral votes. So that's a pretty good place to start with. So let's go ahead and account for some of the safe red states. So Alaska, Alaska is definitely red. I mean, the people there are not red for the same reason as like Alabama. In fact, a lot of them believe things that Republicans traditionally don't believe in. Like I know a lot of them are like very pro-environment. They believe in climate change, that kind of stuff, but they're still very, very conservative. And then we have Utah, a lot of Mormons there. Mormons are very socially conservative, even though they may not like the licentious behavior of Trump. We have Idaho, or his past licentious behavior, I should say. A lot of Mormons there as well. Montana. Montana has had an influx of college-age voters and liberal millennials because of cheap real estate price, but it's going to be a while before that becomes competitive, even though it is more liberal compared to its neighboring states. Wyoming, most rural state in the country. The Dakotas, all very rural, very conservative. Nebraska. Now, Nebraska is another one of those states that it's the other state besides Maine that allocates its electoral votes based on district. And in this case, the 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska is going to be competitive, even if the state isn't, because it's very conservative. And the 2nd Congressional District consists of Omaha. And Omaha is the largest city in Nebraska. And Barack Obama won that in 2008. And polls indicate that Joe Biden may win that in 2020. And that's only worth one electoral vote, but that may be useful if the election is like really, really close in the case where it could break a tie. So we'll see. Kansas, that's where Superman's from. We have Oklahoma, probably the only state to never not have a single district that's Democratic. We have Missouri, used to be a bellwether state, not anymore. Arkansas, Bill Clinton's former home state. Louisiana, maybe it used to be more blue, but then Hurricane Katrina killed all the black people, unfortunately. So I don't want to say killed all of them, but it like killed a lot of them and drove a lot of them out of the state. So that made the state effectively much more conservative, which is why it still has a Democratic governor, but it doesn't have any more Democratic senators. Mississippi, the deep south, is all very, very conservative, with the exception of Georgia, which is going to be competitive. South Carolina, Lindsey Graham's home state, is going to be safe red, even though there's a competitive Senate race there. North Carolina is going to be competitive, and Florida is going to be competitive as well. But Tennessee, Kentucky, even though they have some blue parts, like Louisville in Kentucky is very liberal, the states at large are very, very conservative. Now, Indiana. Barack Obama did win Indiana in 2008, and I have no idea why. I mean, Barack Obama also won North Carolina, but that can be explained by the large population of black voters. But there aren't many black people in Indiana, so I think that Barack Obama winning Indiana is the most, amazing political upset in basically political history. To this day, I have no idea how he did it, but it's probably never going to happen again. Certainly not in this election, since Mike Pence that's Mike Pence's home state. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Am I missing anything? I think that may be it as far as safe states go. So let's go ahead and look at these competitive states, and I'm going to give my... Oh, wait. My bad. West Virginia. West Virginia used to be a very Democratic state until 2004, and now it's one of the most... it's funny because the majority of voters are still registered Democrats, but they're very, very conservative Democrats. There is a conservative Democratic senator there, Joe Manchin, but there is no way they're ever voting Democratic ever again, at least not for the foreseeable future. All right. So... let's get to the point of this video. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the swing states, and I'm going to give my prediction of which way they will go. So first one is New Hampshire, and I think that Biden is going to win New Hampshire. And the reason why is because, the polls there are just they're not as competitive as they were in 2016. And even in 2016, Clinton won New Hampshire, albeit by a very, very narrow margin. And also, I don't think Trump has made quite as big of a push in New Hampshire as he did last time. Trump is from New York, which isn't part of New England. I don't think it is. No, I don't think, I sound really stupid right now. No, I don't think New York is considered part of New England. But in any case, I think he wanted to win at least one northeastern state, so he campaigned really hard in New Hampshire. He didn't quite make it, but he came very, very close. So as far as the first flip goes, I do think that Joe Biden is going to win Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. I'm sorry. I'll get to that later. Maine's 2nd Congressional District, just because he's been leading pretty consistently in the polls. And yes, I know that the polls aren't always right, but if you look at the 2016 polls, the way it worked is that the polls showed Clinton with a sizable lead until the whole Comey letter thing hit, where it showed that he reopened the investigation into Clinton's emails. After that, the election did get close, and the polls did indicate it. It showed that Clinton had a slight national lead, and that several states were within the margin of error. And that's actually how the election turned out. She ended up winning the popular vote by about 2.1 percentage points, or 3 million votes, and she narrowly lost all the swing states. So I think that the polls are probably going to be accurate in the case of Maine. I mean, that doesn't mean the polls are always right, but doesn't mean that they're always wrong just because they were wrong once in 2016. But anyways, moving on from that, I think the next state that is going to be still remain in the Democratic column is Minnesota. And Minnesota is to the left of the other Rust Belt states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I mean, if you want to consider Minnesota part of the Rust Belt. And, Clinton won that state. And, Clinton was a immensely unpopular candidate. She didn't even campaign hard in Minnesota, unlike Joe Biden. Although Trump has been campaigning there harder as well. But I just do not see Joe Biden losing Minnesota this time when Hillary Clinton won the state, because nobody liked Hillary Clinton. The only reason people voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 is because they didn't like Trump. Granted, that's why a lot of people are voting this year, because they don't like Trump, but some people genuinely do like Joe Biden. He has a higher favorability rating than Hillary Clinton. He actually a plurality of voters actually view him favorably. They just see him as empathetic. They like him. They see him as like just a genuine dude. Whether or not you agree with that, that's just what most people think, and because of that, I think he'll do better than Clinton in Minnesota. All right. Now for my home state of Colorado. Colorado has been trending more and more blue over the years. It used to be a solid red state, but then an influx of liberal voters from Colorado emigrated here, and they made weed legal, and they also made it a blue state. And the Senate race here isn't very competitive either. I think that Joe Biden will easily win Colorado, and that's why Donald Trump hasn't campaigned very hard in the state. So as for the next state that I think will stay in the, as for the first state that I think will stay in the Trump column, I think that Florida will ultimately stay in the Trump column, and that will be a big disappointment to Democratic voters, even though Joe Biden doesn't need Florida in order to win. And that's just because Florida has a history of breaking the hearts of Democrats. It first broke the hearts of Democrats in 2000 when it initially looked like Al Gore won the state, but then the media changed their projection, and then the whole like fiasco happened with the Supreme Court cutting out the recount, and then George Bush won the state by 519 votes or something like that. And in 2018, everybody thought that Florida was going to flip blue and that the governor was going to win there, but nope. Rick Scott beat the Bill Nelson, the incumbent, and the governor's mansion stayed in Republican hands. And I think the same thing's going to happen in 2020. I mean, even though some of the polls have indicated that will be competitive, I think that in the case of a tie in Florida, if the race says it's a tie, if the polls say it's a tie in Florida, that means the Republican wins 100% of the time. I mean, maybe this year it'll be different, but I seriously doubt it. So I think this will stay in Republican hands. All right. The next state I think will stay in Republican hands is Ohio. And I think one of the reasons why is because they have a very popular Republican governor. And he's not enthusiastically pro-Trump, but he's not like anti-Trump the same way John Kasich was, although John Kasich was a popular Republican governor as well. And also, I think Ohio has become like a little bit more Republican over the years. It's traditionally been a bellwether state where like it would determine the winner of the vote for whoever the winner of the election was. But I think it will lose that trend this year. So I do think Ohio is going to go red. So another state I think is going to go red this year is North Carolina. And the reason why is because Obama won the 2008 election in a landslide, yet North Carolina was like the closest state in the country. I think maybe Missouri was a little bit closer, but as far as like the states Obama won, that was the closest. McCain only lost the state by like 0.1 percentage points or something crazy like that. And I don't see Joe Biden getting the same numbers as North Carolina, and I don't see him getting quite the same African-American turnout as Barack Obama. And, this would be a very nice victory for Democrats, because North Carolina is called very early in the election typically. So if like this went blue, they'd be like, oh, we don't even have to worry about any of the other states anymore. There's no way Trump is going to win. So that would be a big relief for a lot of Democratic voters. But I don't think it's going to happen this year. I think that Joe Biden is going to lose North Carolina. I think Donald Trump is going to hold on to North Carolina. I think the margin's going to be a little bit narrower, maybe like 1 or 2 percentage points as opposed to 3.5. But I still think Trump is going to win North Carolina. All right. So the next state I'm going to classify as staying in Democratic hands is Nevada. And Nevada is the opposite of Florida, that it tends to underpoll Democrats. So, like, I think polls were actually showing Trump was a little bit ahead in Nevada, but Clinton ended up winning that state. And the polls right now say that Biden is substantially ahead, so I think he's going to win Nevada by a comfortable margin, especially if you consider a demographic change in the state. There's like a large influx of Latino voters, and I know Latino voters are not voting overwhelmingly with Democrats the same way they are, like the same way like African Americans are, for instance. But traditionally or historically, with the exception of like some states like Florida that have a large Cuban American population, Latino voters tend to vote more Democratic. And speaking of which, I think that Arizona is not quite going to flip this year. I know that people are talking about that. Now, the Senate race is a different story. We're going to get to that later. I think the Senate race is that where the Democrat Mark Kelly's running, that's a bit different. But in terms of the presidential election, I don't think Arizona is quite going to make it into the Democratic column, and that's going to be a big disappointment to a lot of Democrats. That's a path to victory that's going to be shut off to them, and I think it's going to be very, very close. But ultimately, I think that Trump is going to win Arizona. But in the case of 2024, Republicans are going to have to fight very, very, very hard for the state because it has been trending more Democratic over the years. I don't think it's quite going to go Democratic this year, but I do think it's going to be very, very close, but no cigar. All right, next up is Iowa. Iowa is a very, it's interesting because it's not overwhelmingly Republican, even though it's very rural, it's very white. But I mean, you'd expect it to be as conservative as like, like North Dakota, South Dakota, but it's not. It's actually just, it's just kind of, it's more like a Republican in the same way like Texas is Republican now, which is not overwhelmingly Republican. But it's very white, very rural, but even though it's not overwhelmingly Republican, I still think that Donald Trump is going to win the state. The polls seem to indicate that. And, the Senate race might go a different way because there is a competitive Senate race in Iowa, but I do not see Joe Biden winning Iowa this year. All right. Next up is Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, and I kind of spoiled this already, but I do think Joe Biden is going to pick this up. And that's going to be important in case this election goes to a tie or something like that, because it is only worth one electoral vote. But that consists of Omaha, which is the biggest city in Nebraska. I'm talking about the 2nd Congressional District. I think that Biden will carry that one narrowly, and that will give him that one electoral vote. So that will be nice. It won't be like a huge prize, but it'll be nice to have that, especially if the election is very, very close. And also, I think a lot of Omaha voters may be a little bit mad at Trump since he abandoned a lot of them in the cold during that rally. I mean, maybe they don't care. I mean, I think it's pretty funny, frankly. I mean, I hope they're okay, but I just think the story, if you don't take it too seriously, is pretty funny. All right. Now, for the next state that I think is going to flip, I think Michigan is going to flip from Trump to Biden. I think that this time it's not even close. I mean, like when I saw 2016 and I saw Trump like campaigning heavily in Michigan, and I saw him like talking about like bringing back like manufacturing jobs and stuff like that, I knew he was going to have a strong shot in Michigan because he was a political outsider, and these people had lost their jobs. Employment wasn't looking very. I mean, like the economy was the economic recovery was slow at the point, I guess you can say. So a lot of people like Trump, they thought of him as like an outsider who would drain the swamp and everything like that. But now he has a record to run on, and from the look of things, people in Michigan don't seem to like Trump very much. So I think that Michigan may be closer than some of the other Rust Belt states, but I think that Biden is going to flip Michigan. And on that note, I think he's also going to flip Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes are going to go to Joe Biden. And I say that because Democrats had a very good year in Wisconsin. In 2018, they got Scott Evers elected as the first Democratic governor in like since I forgot his name, but it was damn it, I forgot his name. I just had a brain fart right there. But Wisconsin elected a Democratic governor in 2018, and I don't think they took control of the state legislature. But also a lot of the polls indicate that Wisconsin shows Biden ahead pretty substantially. No, I don't want to go entirely by the polls, but when you have polls showing him like 17 points ahead in Wisconsin, I realize that's probably an outlier, but even if the poll is like dramatically wrong, chances are he's still pretty substantially ahead, well outside the margin of error at least. And okay, so for the next state that I think is going to stay in the Republican column, let's go for Texas. Texas, I think, is going to be close in the same way it was in 2018 with when Beto O'Rourke almost upset Ted Cruz. He lost by just like 2.5 percentage points to Ted Cruz, who was the incumbent. But I just do not see Democrats winning Texas this year. Now, I understand turnout has been remarkably high, and I think people put a little bit too much emphasis in turnout. I haven't seen any proof that early turnout or high turnout necessarily benefits Democrats. I mean, maybe it does, but for all we know, those people turning out could very well be Republicans. And also, I heard that like 120,000 ballots from like the Houston region may be thrown out. I know that's been appealed to a higher court, so we'll see what happens there. So if there's some voter suppression, that may make it harder for Democrats to flip this state. But if they did flip that state, that would be game over for the Republicans, because that would be like the equivalent of Democrats losing California. I mean, this is the biggest electoral prize for states that typically vote Republican, Texas. So they need to fight very hard in future elections not to lose a state. I mean, Texas is not a state that they can afford to lose unless they flip several other blue states, and I just don't see that happening. All right, next up is Georgia. And I think that's going to stay red as well, just because I don't think Joe Biden is going to get quite the same African-American turnout as Barack Obama did in 2008. And even Barack Obama didn't win Georgia. Like, from what I've heard, turnout is a little bit depressed this year. So, a lot of the people are saying this is going to be like a landslide election. I disagree. I think this is going to be pretty close. But that being said, I do think Joe Biden is going to win this election narrowly, because I do think he's going to win Pennsylvania. Because even though the numbers aren't as lopsided in his favor as like Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota, the polls show him pretty consistently ahead. I mean, even Rasmussen, which is a Republican-biased poll, showed him 1 point ahead in Pennsylvania, which is within the margin of error, but we are talking about a Republican pollster. So I think that Joe Biden is going to get the electoral votes he needs to win the election, and Donald Trump is only going to be a one-term president. He'll be the first president to serve one term since 1992, when George H.W. Bush was defeated by Bill Clinton. So I predict Joe Biden is going to win the presidency, but he's not going to have very much teeth as president unless he also wins the Senate. Now, we already can safely assume that he's going to have at least control of one branch of Congress, and that's the U.S. House of Representatives, because even in a best-case scenario for Republicans, they're likely not going to gain control of the U.S. House of Representatives, and Nancy Pelosi is still going to remain Speaker of the House. However, to pass a lot of legislation as well as to control judicial appointments, Democrats will need to make sure that Mitch McConnell becomes the minority leader next year, and I think that's the best they can hope for as far as Mitch McConnell's seat goes. You'll see it's listed as safe over here, because Amy McGrath, the challenger there, doesn't really have much of a chance. I mean, Mitch McConnell is not terribly popular in his state, but I think Kentucky voters, they're very conservative, and they also like the power of having the majority leader in their state. So that's not going anywhere. But let's go ahead and look at the states that do have a chance to flip. I have them all listed in brown over here. And the first state that I think is going to flip will be Colorado, and that will go from Republican to Democratic hands. Cory Gardner, the incumbent, is not very popular just due to the fact that he has a strong relationship with the president. He's voted with him like nearly 100% of the time, and Colorado has trended more blue in recent elections. I mean, it's been a blue state ever since 2008. In 2018, we elected a gay man as governor by double digits. So we're pretty progressive now, and a lot of it has to do with like the influx of immigrants from California, which occurred in the 90s and 2000s, and Denver and Boulder have become increasingly liberal. And I live in like the more red part of Colorado, but if I drive down to Denver, it's almost like San Francisco at this point. So Colorado is definitely a safe blue state. And Cory Gardner, when he won in 2014, it was kind of a fluke. He won in a year that was really, really bad for Democrats, and he only won by like half a percentage point or something like that against I think it was Mark Udall, who was the Democratic incumbent who lost the seat that year. All right. So for the next seat, I'm going to go over Alaska. This one actually doesn't have a Democrat challenging the Republican incumbent. The Republican incumbent is Dan Sullivan, but the independent candidate who's challenging him is Al Gross, who's a physician and a commercial fisherman, and I think he's running a better than expected campaign, but I still expect Dan Sullivan to win this by at least 5 or 6 percentage points or so. So I do not see this one going blue or whatever color you want to assign to independents this year. So it'll be close, but no cigar. Now, as for Montana, Montana has a pretty strong challenger running, and it's the incumbent governor of the state of Montana, Steve Bullock, and he ran for president briefly, and he's very popular in his home state. He's a strong candidate, and if this weren't a presidential election year, I think you'd have a chance, but the fact that he has to share the ballot with Donald Trump means that he's not likely going to win unless the state's history of vote splitting really works in his favor, and it may still, but as of now, I see this one narrowly going to Steve Daines, who's the incumbent. And I don't see Steve Bullock winning this year, although it will be close. I remember Phil Bredesen ran in 2018. He was the governor of Tennessee, but he was a former governor, and he ran against that one woman who won the seat. I forgot her name. But anyways, everybody thought it was going to be a close election, but he ended up losing by like 9 percentage points. But anyways, moving on. The next one that I think is going to stay in Republican hands is Kansas. This is an open seat, but I do not really see like the Democratic candidate winning. It's Barbara Bollier, and she's running against what's his face? I actually wrote it down right here. Oh yeah, Pat Roberts, and he's pretty obscure. He doesn't have very much of a presence on the Senate floor, so I don't see him too often. That's why I had to write it down. But anyways, Pat Roberts, Some polls have indicated that it's competitive, and that's why I put it. That's why I didn't list it as a safe state. And Barbara Bollier is a fairly strong candidate from everything I've researched, but it looks like Democrats are not going to have a chance here, and that's because Chris Kobach, who was running in the primary, didn't win. And Chris Kobach is a very unpopular Republican. He ran for the governor's race in 2018. He won the nomination, but then as a result of that, Kansas's gubernatorial election actually fell into the hands of the Democratic Party because of that. So I think Republicans are like, oh, we're not making that same mistake again. No way. So that's going to stay safely in Republican hands. Speaking of which, I think that Texas will also stay in Republican hands. Now, John Cornyn, who's the incumbent in Texas, he's not as unpopular as Ted Cruz. He's a little bit more popular in Texas compared to Ted Cruz. And, Ted Cruz narrowly won the election in 2018, and this time it's a presidential election year. And even though Texas is going to be competitive, I do think that Donald Trump is ultimately going to carry Texas. And I think that John Cornyn will outperform Donald Trump, as the polls indicate, probably by several percentage points. So MG Heger, who is the Democratic incumbent, she's not as strong of an incumbent as Beto O'Rourke, so I do not think this one's going to go for the Democrats this year, unless there's like a huge upset. But one seat that I do think will go for the Democrats is Arizona, and I'm surprised I didn't mention this one sooner, because the incumbent there, Martha McSally, she actually, it's a pretty complicated story. What happened is that when Jeff Flake, the previous incumbent, retired, there was an open Senate race, and it was between Kyrsten Sinema and Martha McSally in 2018, and Kyrsten Sinema actually ended up winning that election. However, there was another open seat because John Kyle, who was appointed after John McCain died, retired, and then Martha McSally, the runner-up of the other seat, was appointed to that seat, and now there's a special election being held, and this time the Democratic incumbent is an even stronger candidate than Kyrsten Sinema was. So Mark Kelly is going to easily win this race, especially since Martha McSally has proven herself to be pretty unpopular in the state of Arizona, so I don't think she is going to win. I think this is going to fall into Democratic hands. So that's another pickup for the Democratic Party. Now, one seat that is for sure, almost certain going to go for the Republicans, though, is in Alabama. And the person running there is Tommy Tuberville. He's running against Doug Jones. Now, Doug Jones, he's very, very lucky that he ever got to be a U.S. Senator at all. I mean, it's just a twist of luck that he happened to be running against one of the most scandal-prone Republicans to ever run for the United States Senate, one of the most divisive figures like Roy Moore. And for those of you who don't know, Roy Moore was running in there was a special election in Alabama after Jeff Sessions was put into the Trump cabinet, and then there was an open race, and nobody thought anything of it. They thought, oh, it's Alabama, of course the Republicans going to win. But the Republican Party was stupid enough to appoint Roy Moore, and Roy Moore had some notoriety as he was the Ten Commandments judge, and he was the judge who refused to obey a state court to remove the 10 Commandments from the courthouse, and he got disbarred as a result of that. And now he was running for the U.S. Senate, and everybody thought he was going to be a shoo-in just because Alabama was such an overwhelmingly red state. But then it was discovered that he had he had a pretty colorful past, and the controversy regarding him and being flirtatious with underage girls caused him to lose the seat narrowly to Doug Jones by about 3 percentage points. But the fact that it was even that close just shows how conservative Alabama is. And this time Doug Jones is running against a popular football coach, so he's definitely going to lose. And maybe he'll be appointed to the Biden cabinet, but as far as his political career as a U.S. Senator in the state of Alabama goes, it's going to be over very, very soon. So that's going to be a flip to the Republicans. All right, the next state that a lot of Republicans see as a pickup opportunity is Michigan. And Michigan has Gary Peters, who I guess represents what is at the time being considered a red state since Donald Trump won it in 2016. And he's running against John James. Now, John James did better than expected when he ran in 2018. So Republicans are hoping that he can upset Gary Peters. And some polls have shown to be close, but the polls that show it really close are usually polls that are more Republican biased, like the Trafalgar polling firm, as well as Rasmussen. So I do think that Gary Peters is going to beat John James. It may be closer than expected. He may be able to keep it within 4 or 3 percentage points, but ultimately I think Gary Peters is going to win this Senate race, especially since Democrats saw how close John James got last time, and I think they're paying more close attention to this seat. So as far as pickup opportunities go, I think North Carolina is going to go to the Democrats. Tom Tillis is another example of a Republican who won in 2014, and it was like a fluke for him. It was very, very close, and he's very unpopular these days. Just North Carolinian voters don't like him. And there's also a a Democratic gubernatorial race. I mean, a gubernatorial race happening this year, and the incumbent is a Democrat, I should say, and he's very popular. So there may be like a down ballot effect with him helping out the Democratic challenger, Cal Cunningham. And Cal Cunningham, he was recently involved in a sex scandal where he was caught texting someone who wasn't his wife. And what I thought was really funny about that is that his approval rating went down a little bit with women, but it went up by 13 percentage points with men after that scandal broke. So, bros before hoes, right? So I thought that was pretty funny. But I think that Cal Cunningham is going to make a pickup here for the Democratic Party. Okay, next up is Maine. And I think that Susan Collins is going to lose her seat here. Maine is interesting as in it has ranked choice voting, and you can look that up. But basically, I think that Susan Gideon, who's the Maine Speaker of the House, she's taken advantage of the president's unpopularity in the state, and she's successfully tied Susan Collins to the president, especially since Susan Collins voted for Brett Kavanaugh, which was a very unpopular decision. She didn't vote for ACB, but it may be a little too late. And also, she's raised a lot more money than Susan Collins. And as far as I know, this is the only competitive race that Susan Collins has ever been in. And also, the fact that it's a presidential year and Biden's likely to carry Maine pretty substantially means that there will be a down ballot effect. So I think that Susan Gideon is going to defeat Susan Collins pretty handedly in the state, and that's going to be the end of her political career. So the battle of the Susans. It's funny how some of these candidates have like similar first names. You have like Steve Bullock, Steve Daines, Susan Collins, Susan Gideons. I had to actually double check that to make sure I was getting her name right because it just seemed like too much of a coincidence. But yeah, her name is Susan Gideon. Okay, so moving on, we have South Carolina, and let me tell you, I fucking hate Lindsey Graham, and I know a lot of Republicans hate Lindsey Graham too, and they're just voting for him because they want to make sure that the Democrats don't have too much power, so they're only voting for him out of partisanship. And he's one of the very few remaining neocons that are still in the U.S. Senate, and the neocons were the dominant ideology of the Republican Party during the George W. Bush administration, and he's one of the few who still remain. And he's definitely gay. I mean, that's like basically just nothing against that or anything. I mean, even though it's pretty funny how he's been in the closet for so long, and he's like nearly in his 70s right now, and he's not willing to step out and admit that he's gay. I mean, he's been a single man his whole life, and he has kind of a feminine demeanor, so I think it's pretty obvious that he's a gay man, but he just he knows that's not popular in the state of South Carolina, so that's probably why he's not stepping out of the closet. But, maybe if he loses, he'll finally step out. And he's facing Jamie Harrison, who has outraised him in money, so much so to the point where he's on Fox News crying and begging people for donations. But because South Carolina is still an overwhelmingly Republican state, I do think that Lindsey Graham is going to narrowly hold on to this seat. And speaking of, now that we're in the Deep South, let's go ahead and look at Mississippi. We have Mike Espy, who's running against Sidney Hyde-Smith, and he ran against her in a special election last year where he lost by just 8 percentage points, which is very impressive for Mississippi. And there are some polls that show him within single digits, but it's not going to be close enough. He's still going to lose this election because, Mississippi is just super, super conservative. And also, as far as Iowa goes, we have Joni Ernst, and the only thing I remember about her, other than just being an extremely partisan Republican, is that she ran a campaign commercial where she was bragging about castrating pigs, which I thought was pretty disturbing. But I think that the recent A-plus rated polls like Selzer recently showed that she was ahead pretty significantly over Teresa Greenfield, who's a Democratic challenger. So I do think that she is going to be reelected, and it's going to be close, but I think she's going to hold on to the seat. But as far as seats that Democrats are going to hold on to, I think that Minnesota is going to stay in the Democratic column. I think that Tina Smith is going to easily hold on to this seat. I mean, there's been some polls that show it's somewhat close, but Minnesota is still a pretty safe blue state. I mean, it's been a blue state, voted Democratic in every election since 1984, and the last time a Republican represented this state was, I think, Norm Coleman. And that was in 2008 or something, and I don't see that changing this year. So yeah, Tina Smith will hold on to this seat. So assuming my presidential election prediction holds true, that will mean that Democrats now officially have control of the United States Senate. It won't be an outright majority, but it will mean that Vice President Kamala Harris will be able to act as the tiebreaker vote, thus effectively giving the Democrats control of the United States Senate. However, since it is a 50-50 majority with Vice Presidential Kamala Harris acting as a tiebreaker, that means means that Democrats may have to do split committee assignments, and also there's a chance they may lose some important pieces of legislation because there's some conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin who may break with the Democratic Party every now and then. So I know that Democrats would prefer to have an outright majority, and fortunately for them, they still have 2 more pickup opportunities in the state of Georgia, and I say 2 because there's a general election as well as a special election in the state of Georgia. So that's interesting since there's 2 pickup opportunities there. So for the first general election, there's Jon Ossoff, who's running against the incumbent David Perdue. And Jon Ossoff has been consistently polling better than Joe Biden in this state. And I think Joe Biden will lose Georgia narrowly, as I already predicted. However, I think that Jon Ossoff is going to win this seat slightly, just because David Perdue is not a very popular incumbent. And he also made an ass of himself in the debate where he got totally destroyed. And it was so bad that he cucked out of the next debate. So that's not a good look for him. So I'm going to go ahead and list this as a pickup for Jon Ossoff, thus giving Democrats an outright majority. Now, the other election here is Raphael Warnock, and he's running against Kelly Loeffler, who's also fending off a challenge from another Republican. And the way this election works is that there's a lot of people running, and it's called a jungle primary, and the top 2 candidates will face off against each other in January, and that is unless, of course, one of them gets an outright majority, in which case they will win. I don't see that happening. I think what's going to happen is that Raphael Warnock is going to run against Kelly Loeffler, and I think that since Joe Biden is going to get elected president, that's going to make Republicans very, very upset, so they're going to try to avenge Donald Trump by going out to the polls to make sure that Joe Biden can't get another Senate seat, and therefore I think Republican turnout is going to be remarkably high, and because of that, I think Raphael Warnock is going to lose, not in November. I think he's going to make it to the runoff, but I think he's going to lose in the runoff election. So I think this one will go to Kelly Loeffler. So that is my final prediction. Basically, I think that for a second, I thought I forgot to fill in Hawaii. So I think that Democrats are going to get 280 electoral votes. You only need 270 to win. Republicans are going to get 258. So even though some of the polls show this is going to be a close election, I think that Joe Biden is going to win only narrowly. So he's not going to have like a huge mandate when he becomes president. And so this is not going to be like a historic landslide election like 1988 or 2008 or anything like that. But in the case of the Senate, I think that Democrats are going to retake the Senate, but it's going to be a narrow majority. And then I think that the midterm elections are going to be really, really competitive. And how well the Democrats do is going to be based on how popular Joe Biden is. And, we're a very divided nation politically. And that's why I think it's important to just try to enjoy these elections, enjoy the excitement behind them, and just remember that we're all Americans, and we'll see how it goes. So go ahead and let me know what you guys think about this prediction. Go ahead and give me your own predictions if you're interested. And, God bless America and all that stuff. All right, take care.